Hi, in this video we'll talk a little bit about Chine Colle and some of the paper choices you might make, and then we'll talk about a two-step process where we glue down the piece of colored paper before we print the block, and then we'll try another demo where we show you incorporating the Chine Colle paper as you're printing. So that's more of a one-step process. When you're thinking about Chine Colle papers, you want papers typically that are thin enough that they're not going to wrinkle. And there's a lot of variations that you can choose from. So this particular paper has these embedded fibers. In some cases, those thick fibers might interfere with some of your delicate line work. So you have to maybe do a little test plate and see if that's going to be a problem. But there are some interesting textures, and it makes it somewhat transparent. Like you'll see some thicker pieces of fibers in some areas than the others. So this one might be a good choice for this image. This one is also pretty interesting. It's a paper from a art supply store. It's got these embedded leaves in it, so they're actually real leaves that have been pressed into the paper. And again, there are some thick spots and some thinner spots, which might be a problem if you've got a really intricate image, but it might work really well for a simple bold image. There's also the option of some textured paper. So this kind of paper is from a scrapbooking supply place, and it could actually be fun to use as a element in a collagraph plate, where you glue this onto your cardboard block, and then when you ink it up, the raised areas of the paper will accept the texture. So that could be kind of a fun thing to play with too, as part of your actual printing block instead of something that you just glue on later. But it could also be a decorative paper that gets glued on as you're developing the image on the paper. This is a kind of gaudy. It's got some glitter in it, and but it's also kind of a fun like wallpaper pattern or something that could be used in the background. This piece is not going to be quite big enough for my purposes, but it also has a slightly raised surface. So there's a chance that this could also work as a collagraph layer, where you might see a subtle texture of these leaves that print if you were to ink it up as a relief block. This is some more of the same kind of paper with the strands embedded in the Japanese paper. These can also be dyed. So if you don't have a color paper that you really would like for your image, or if you want to try to suggest sort of an out of focus, murky, like a atmospheric background, you can dye your own paper. So you can use watercolors, you can use alcohol inks, you can use you could even pre-print some of these with your monotype plate to create a real specific background if you want to have a little more control over it. You can also do gradated washes, so if you want something to go from a dark blue to a green, you can pre-print that, and then once the paper's dry, you can cut it out and use it as an element in your Chine Colle project. This is a little bit heavier washi paper. It's I believe it's a mulberry, but it might be a hosho. And it also would dye really nicely. It's a real absorbent paper, and you could ink it up, and then if you want it to dry real flat, you can just allow it to dry on a piece of glass, or as it gets almost dry to the touch, you could press it under some boards. But pressing it tends to put more wrinkles into it sometimes if it's a real absorbent paper like this. So I would suggest maybe just getting it really wet with watercolors and then lay it on glass to dry. This is also kind of a strange paper. I think it's actually a thin layer of cork that's been glued down to this kind of smooth, this is almost like copier paper on the back side. So it could create an interesting background. It does have some height change to it though, so it's possible that the image wouldn't print completely evenly. Like these low spots might not pick up the image at all. So you'd have to consider that when you're testing out different kinds of paper. And then here's another one that's really pretty fun. On the back side, it feels just like a washi paper. It's real absorbent. And on the front side, there's these golden fibers that add a lot of sheen. And it's very smooth. So this would print really beautifully with almost any wood block or relief block that you might have. So I'm going to pick out one of these papers to use as a background. I think I might just try this. This is kind of a fun, bright paper. And so as we're planning this, what we want to think about is, in the end, we want the silvery or the golden fibers to be face up. So we would want to cut out a piece that fits exactly in the space, and then I need a little triangle of paper that fits in this corner. But I don't want red to be where his face is, and I also don't want red to be where the shine on the pipe is. So I need to plan that kind of carefully so that the image is in the right spot. So I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. I don't want to have pencil lines on the surface that's going to be showing in the end of the print. So I think what I want to do is we're going to be putting glue on the back side. Yeah, let me kind of talk myself through this. I think I'm going to try using the transfer paper to get this on here. This is a little bit too opaque to be able to see through on a tracing table, unlike some of these real thin washi papers are. So I'm going to pause for a minute. I think I'll grab some red transfer paper and see if we can get the shapes transferred in the right spot here. Okay, so I made double sure that I was putting the right side of the paper oriented relative to my image. This is an actual print, and I do want to keep it in good shape. So I first tried out some of our red transfer paper that we get from McLean's, and after I did the test, I realized that the red marks just don't show up well on this red sheen collé paper that I'm going to be using. So I'm going to make my own transfer paper. This is just a piece of cheap like layout bond paper, and I used a soft piece of charcoal and just rubbed it on the side and buffed it in a little bit so that there's charcoal over all of this scrap of paper. So this is just sort of a makeshift transfer paper. You could use white chalk, and after I did the black I was thinking white might be better because it'll be less messy and it might show up better on the red than the black does. But it should be like a chalk pastel. Oil pastels aren't going to work as well, but if you have any sort of, even sidewalk chalk would probably work okay. You just want a nice heavy coverage. And then we're going to, so I've hinged my actual print to my sheen collé paper. Then I want to put the charcoal side face down so that it's facing the back side of the sheen collé paper. And then I do want to protect my print. I don't want to draw all over the back of it. So I'm going to be using another sheet of parchment paper over top so that I can hopefully not ruin my print. So I will tape this down as well. And when I'm tracing the lines, I want to be thinking about which parts need to be the colored part of the background. So I've drawn a guideline where I know right where the edge of the plate is, so I'll trace that mark using a ruler first. And try to be as precise as you can. I'm going to check and see if I lined up the charcoal under this part of the paper. I'm not sure that I put it that far down, but let's see if it's... Okay, yeah, I can see the guideline faintly there, so I think I'm okay. And we also want to mark this top edge of the image. I'm using a ballpoint pen because it's less likely to rip through the paper, and it's also an easier way for me to tell which lines I've already drawn over. Sometimes the graphite pencil doesn't show up quite as well as a colored ballpoint pen will. So for the back part of the head, really I don't need very much. I do want the sky to kind of show through his kind of scraggly hair here. So I want to keep this part. And then this is actually shine on his hair, so I don't want that to be the color of the background. But I will follow pretty carefully along this contour of his forehead. Now I don't really want the glasses to be blocked out, so I'll trace the nose, but I won't trace that lens of his glasses. And here I'm just going to kind of follow along his chin. I'm not going to cut the whole shape of the pipe out. I'm going to cut a couple of little holes so that the shine part shows up, but I don't think I want to cut the whole pipe shape out. So those shapes should be okay. So this is the part that I'll keep. this is the part that we'll get rid of. And I think as long as the charcoal paper was in the right spot, I should have most of that information transferred. So let's peek before I pull everything off and make sure we've got our key lines there. So I'm wondering, this might have shifted a little bit. Well, we'll see. I should have had that nudged over a little bit, I think, but we might be okay. I'm going to pull the tracing paper out of there. Well, it does seem to be lined up okay, I think. So we're going to go ahead and see how it goes without redrawing it. Okay, so at this point, we're going to be cutting these shapes out, and I will... Okay, so that actually lines up right with the top of the paper, so I don't need to cut that edge. It looks like it's already set to go. We'll just trim out the rest of the edges. And I always feel like the X-acto knife is a little bit more accurate than trying to use scissors for straight edges like that. The other thing I like to keep in mind, I mean, this paper, it's pretty obvious which side you want facing up in the print and which side you're going to put the paste on. But believe me, it's really easy to get confused and accidentally glue the wrong side of the paper, and then it just doesn't fit with your image. So I usually, just to be safe, will write, you know, paste this side or something like that, because I've messed these up so many times. So it's just easy to get confused when you've got the inked block and the paper and these little bits floating around. So, and then we'll get rid of this piece and that piece. So pull this out of the way so we can do some cutting, and make sure you can see okay. You want a very sharp blade. Replace the blade in your X-acto knife before you start trimming up your Sheen Colle paper. Watch your fingertips, always. The other option that works really nicely is to, looks like I lost a little bit of the image right there. Let me just see what we need. Okay, looks like it just pretty much goes straight up from there, so I think I'm probably okay to just wing that part of it. Doesn't feel like I'm quite through the paper, so let me cut over that edge again. Okay, so that's a part I'll keep. Oh, I lost a little bit of the design again there. The very top. Okay. Don't really even need this piece. And then this is where the little shine marks on the pipe will be. The reason I decided to do this as a two-step version where we glue down the sheen collé paper first and then print the block on top, is because my particular block, the area where the colored paper is going to be, almost all of the block is cut away in those areas. So this area is very rough on the block. And so trying to ink this and glue the paper on all in one motion, I don't think it's going to be very successful because there's not enough surface area to really attach the paste to our printing paper. So I think I just want to make sure I get a nice smooth application of our negative shapes first, and then hopefully we can line this up right on top of it and print it in the right spot. So the next step then is to plan out your printing paper. So this is a nice heavyweight piece of Canson edition paper, and I'm not planning to dampen it, especially with the glued on paper. That could be problematic. So what I did in preparation was I just traced the actual block real lightly with pencil. Since this is our actual print, we don't want those pencil lines to show up in the final image, so you want to keep them as faint as you can. Use as sharp tip pencil. The mechanical pencils work really great for that. And I just want to make sure I get any charcoal off my fingertips before I touch anything. Okay. All right, and then the next step is to figure out where we need to attach these. So we're going to be pasting it and then sticking it down. So I just want to make sure, if I plot this out right, that it's going to turn out the way the print needs to be. So again, just one more chance to double check that we've got things oriented the right way. So I think that's a good strategy. So I'm just going to make a note for myself too that this is where the big piece is going to go. Maybe even trace out, yeah, might help just to have a couple landmarks to aim for here, but you don't want a lot of this to show up in the final print, so keep everything subtle. Any of your notations, maybe just like a dotted line to help you get it on in the right spot once it's glued. All right, now you never want to apply the glue on top of your printmaking paper, so we want to slide that out of the way and bring out a piece of practice paper. It could be newsprint, or it could be extra piece of your parchment paper. And the glue that we'll be using is this nori paste. It comes in larger tubs. It comes in little tiny jars. This one's a little squeeze bottle that works real good for small pieces. And I also want to have some scraps of mat board. You want mat board that's got a nice smooth edge, hopefully that's been cut with a straight edge. And then you need your pieces of the sheen collé paper. So again, I just about pasted the shiny side. It's really bad to be talking and trying to focus on your printing at the same time. But so let's go ahead and try to get the big piece on first. I'm gonna squeeze out some of the paste. I think the lid is dried up a little bit, so we'll just take that off for now. Squeeze some of the paste out. If you feel like you need to dilute this with a tiny bit of water, you can do that. Some artists like to apply the glue with a brush, and that's fine too. The main thing to think about is you don't want any glue to be getting underneath the backside of your paper as you're applying the glue. So I like to just kind of start in the middle of the piece, hold it really still so it's not moving around, and then just go straight off the edges and try not to apply the glue coming in toward the edges, because then it gets underneath the paper. So I'll just start right here. You do really want to make sure that the glue gets right to the edges, which makes it a little bit messy, but it will help it to all attach much better if you can get the glue all the way to the sides of the piece. And I'm applying it as thin as I can. I don't want any big globs that are going to ooze out as I'm rubbing it down. So that one is already pretty well glued. There's still a little bit of paste on here. I think it might be enough for this little scrap. I'm nervous about this bit right here, so I want to be pretty careful as I go over that side of it not to rip that piece off. Just really gently. Okay. Now you may find that an x-acto blade might help you position this if the paper is sticking to your fingers. Let's bring this back in. We can see it in the video. Okay. And I just want to be as careful as I can positioning this. You've got a little bit of time. The glue doesn't dry super fast, so do your best to get it nice and flat. And you might take a clean roller and just roll it right across it to help glue it down. All right, and then this piece. Okay, try to make sure the edges are really pasted down well. And then the next step is inking up our block. So I've got some ink here. We'll go ahead and set the paper aside while we ink our block. I want a fairly heavy layer of ink. I think I'm going to add a little bit more. This ink's been sitting out a little bit, so you want to kind of re-wet it. Don't want it too thick. But nice even coverage on the roller. I usually start with a real light touch just so that I don't over ink those delicate lines. I like to make sure I go all the way to the corners, but I don't want to drop off the block, so I'm kind of strategically turning the brayer so it's in a different angle in different parts of the image. Okay, out here I've cut some tiny little marks to kind of help hold the brayer up as it goes across those smoke lines and where the pipe is. And this bottom corner has a little tiny raised area too to help prevent all those low areas from inking up. Okay, I feel like we've got a pretty healthy layer of ink on there. Slide the ink back out of the way. Check my fingertips for any ink that might be on there. And so you can see there's kind of a layer of ink on the plate. Let's bring in our printmaking paper again with the sheen collé already on there. And here's the tricky part, getting that image, getting that block inverted in just the right spot. We have the outline, so I'm going to aim as carefully as I can. Just hit down one corner at a time. And then once it's down, we really don't have much maneuvering room, so just kind of leave it where it is. Now the trick is getting it flipped over so that we can rub the back side of the paper, so hopefully there's enough viscosity in the ink there to keep it stuck on there while we get it flipped over. Okay, let's put some parchment paper down again and some burnishing. Use our wooden spoon. And I'm kind of feeling for the edge of the plate. I don't want to drop off the edge of the plate and put a big crease in the paper, so press pretty hard. This heavyweight printmaking paper requires more pressure than the really smooth washi paper does, so you want to make sure that you're giving enough pressure there to really transfer the ink. I'm going to kind of work at this for a few more minutes, kind of checking my progress as I go, and then we'll reveal it once I feel like it's printed enough. Okay, I've rubbed quite a bit. My shoulder's sore now, so I think we've done enough printing. We're going to peel this back carefully and see how it turned out. Okay. All right, pretty good. I'm a little bit off. Right along the forehead, there's a little spot where my measuring wasn't quite precise enough. It looks like I should have shifted this piece a tiny bit over. Sometimes you can go in after the fact, once the ink is dried, if it really bugs you that there's some orange printed where there should be some white, you can carefully go in with your X-acto blade and just remove the sheen collé there and peel it off so that the white paper shows again. But it will take the printed lines with it, since the sheen collé is trapped underneath the printed layer of the relief block. So only do that if you don't mind that the area becomes white there. But so again, pretty good here. Because the sheen collé paper has some thickness to it, sometimes it's hard to get the wood block burnished down into those lower areas. So you can see I've got a little bit of a white line here, which normally would just be a black part of the plate here where the hair was. Because there's a height change there, you end up with some highlights sometimes where they weren't originally in the block, but I don't think it hurts the image in this case, so I'm pretty happy with it. And then signing this one, it would be a monoprint, because it's not just like an additioned relief block would be. We've got this added element of the sheen collé paper there, so you could call it a monoprint, or you could just, if it's the only one that you printed with that color background, you could just label it TP for trial proof, showing that you just were experimenting with color combinations, but you hadn't really changed anything about the key block itself. All right, good luck with this one.